Who gave you the nickname first?
I joined when I went in the military, and I'm in boot camp, and the Hispanic guy says, "You know what the name Carlos means in English?" I said, "Yeah, it's Charles." He says, "Yeah, and the nickname for Charles is Chuck, and I'm gonna call you Chuck." And for some reason it stuck with me, and from that point on, everyone called me Chuck, so I just stuck with it.
On March 10th, 2026, a short video appeared on Instagram. In the frame, an 86-year-old Chuck Norris stood on a training mat in Hawaii, the Pacific sun behind him. He sparred for a few moments, turned to the camera, and said with a smile, "I don't age, I level up." The internet exploded. After 2 decades, the memes flooded back. Millions shared the video, commenting that the immortal legend had just reached a new level. 9 days later, the Norris family posted a brief announcement on the same account. Chuck had passed away on the morning of March 19th in Hawaii. There was no long illness, no warning, and no public farewell. In less than a week, the last 2 words he gave the world had completely changed their meaning. The question has hung in the air ever since. What really happened during those final 10 days in Hawaii? And who was the man behind the myth of invincibility for the last 60 years? Oklahoma, 1940, the boy who wanted to disappear. Carlos Ray Norris was born on March 10, 1940, in Ryan, Oklahoma, a town with little more than a railroad and open fields. His family was broken before it ever had a chance to form. His father, Ray Norris, was a World War II veteran with a long-term drinking problem. He was barely present during the childhood of his 3 sons. The person who carried the weight of the family was his mother, Wilma. She worked any job she could find to support Carlos and his 2 younger brothers, Wieland and Aaron. When their father left for good, she moved the family from Oklahoma to Kansas, and then to Torrance, California, finding work wherever they landed. Wilma lived to be 103 years old. In her life, she endured a divorce, years of poverty, and the loss of a son in the Vietnam War. But back in the 1940s, she was just a young woman trying to keep her 3 children from going hungry. Everything Chuck Norris would become his endurance, his determination, his faith began in her small kitchen. Carlos was the shyest of the 3 brothers. He had a stutter and was afraid of crowds and confrontation. At school, he chose to sit in the back of the class so no one would see him. His classmates didn't know his name. His teachers didn't call on him. He grew up with the singular feeling that he wasn't strong enough for the world. This was the seed of the greatest conflict in Chuck Norris's life. A person who was taught from birth that he was invisible. Korea, when martial arts saved a boy. In 1958, Carlos turned 18. He enlisted in the U.S. Air Force for 2 simple reasons: to escape poverty and to escape his father's shadow. The military sent him to Osan Air Base in South Korea. There, a chance event changed everything. In his spare time, he began studying a local martial art called Tang Soo Do. For the first few weeks, he lost every drill. His body was slow, his reflexes were poor, and the fear of confrontation from his first 18 years was deeply ingrained. His Korean instructors spoke no English. Carlos spoke no Korean. They communicated through strikes and blocks. Strangely, the harshness of the training is what healed him. Every session forced him to stand before an opponent without running away. Every time he was knocked down, he had to get back up. After nearly 2 years, the boy with the stutter from Oklahoma was gone. The man who returned to America in 1962 was a Tang Soo Do black belt with something new in his eyes. At this stage, martial arts wasn't about defeating anyone else. It was the first language that taught Carlos he had value. But his years in the military gave him more than just martial arts. They also left him with a secret that he would not be forced to confront until a phone call nearly 30 years later. The losing years and a prophecy from Vietnam. In 1962, Carlos was honorably discharged with the rank of Airman First Class. He returned to California and opened a small dojo in Torrance to teach karate. Students were few and far between. Money was tight. To build a reputation, he had to compete. The first 3 years were a string of losses. He lost to Joe Louis. He lost to Alan Steen. He lost to Tony Tulliners in 3 straight rounds at the International Karate Championships. Each time he fell to the mat, the old feeling returned, the quiet voice of the boy with the stutter, whispering that he should have stayed in the back of the classroom. But he didn't stop. In 1967, after fighting 7 consecutive matches in one day, Chuck Norris became the champion at the All-American Tournament of Karate. It was his first major victory. The title didn't matter as much as the moment. For the first time in his life, a coach in his corner called his name, and the entire room stood up. The invisible boy was no longer invisible. While Chuck was climbing the ranks of American karate, his younger brother Wieland was in Vietnam. Before he left, Wieland told Chuck something he would carry for the rest of his life. "Brother, I'm not going to live to see my 27th birthday." In 1970, Wieland was killed in an ambush. He was 26 years old, just as he had said. Chuck received the news over the phone. No one knows what he did for the rest of that day. But from that moment on, something changed. Every punch on the training bag, every tournament, every time he got up after being knocked down, he was no longer fighting for himself. He was living the life his brother never would. Bruce Lee and the Hollywood Door. In the late 1960s, Chuck expanded his dojo and began teaching martial arts to celebrities. One of his students was Steve McQueen. Another man who came to train was Bruce Lee. Chuck and Bruce met through the martial arts community. They trained together in the mid-60s, sparring in private and debating techniques. Bruce saw something in Chuck that Hollywood had not yet noticed. An American martial artist who could stand in front of a camera without looking like a stuntman. In 1972, Bruce invited Chuck to play the main villain in The Way of the Dragon. Their fight scene in the Roman Colosseum became one of the most watched martial arts scenes in film history. When the movie was released, Bruce was the star. Chuck was just a supporting face. But the scene was enough for Hollywood to remember his name. 1 year later, Bruce Lee died suddenly in Hong Kong. He was 32 years old. For Chuck, this was the first great loss of his adult life. Before Bruce, no director in Hollywood believed a fighter from Oklahoma could stand in front of a camera. After Bruce, he had to prove it on his own. Hollywood did not welcome him. Critics called him wooden. Directors said he was a fighter pretending to be an actor. For years, he took small roles in forgettable films, but he didn't quit. Steve McQueen, his former student, was the one who urged him to take acting classes seriously. Chuck listened. In 1977, he landed his first leading role in Breaker. Breaker, an action film shot in just 11 days on a tiny budget. The film turned a profit. Then came Good Guys Wear Black in 1978, followed by A Force of One, The Octagon, and Lone Wolf McQuade. By the mid-1980s, Chuck Norris was no longer a supporting face. He was an action star for an entire generation of Americans. Marriage, Cracks, and a Secret from 1962. While his career was on the rise, Chuck's private life followed a different trajectory. He met Diane Holchek at North High School in Torrance, California, in the late 1950s. They were each other's first love. In December 1958, 6 months after Chuck graduated and prepared to join the Air Force, they married. He was 18, she was 17. They had 2 sons, Mike and Eric. Diane stood by Chuck through his most difficult years. When he opened his dojo and had no students, she worked to pay the bills. When he was losing one tournament after another, she was at home with their 2 children. When he flew to Hong Kong to film with Bruce Lee, she waited. But for decades, there was a truth that not even Chuck knew. In 1962, while stationed in California during his final months in the military, he had a brief affair with a woman named Johanna. He never told her he was married. He was soon discharged and returned home to Diane. The story seemed to be over. In 1991, Chuck was at the height of his fame. Walker, Texas Ranger had just premiered and was becoming a phenomenon. One afternoon, his home phone rang. On the other end of the line was a 26-year-old woman named Dina. She said something that changed everything. "I think you're my father." Her mother was Johanna. For 26 years, Johanna had hidden Dina's father's identity. It was only when Dina grew up, saw Walker, Texas Ranger on television, and recognized him that the truth came out. Chuck agreed to meet Dina. The day they first met, Chuck Norris, the man known as America's toughest, cried. He would later write in his autobiography, "I didn't need a DNA test. I looked in her eyes and I knew." His marriage to Diane had ended 2 years earlier. They separated in 1988 and divorced in 1989 after 30 years together. But strangely, their relationship didn't end with the divorce. They remained in contact, saw each other at family gatherings, and were close friends for the next 36 years, until the day she died. Behind the invincible Chuck Norris image, the world laughed at in memes, was a man who cried when he met the daughter he never knew he had, and whose first marriage was sustained by friendship long after the papers were signed. The fights with no opponent. In 1998, Chuck married for the second time. His new wife, Gina O'Kelly, was a former model from Texas, 23 years his junior. They had twins. For many years, this was the most peaceful chapter of his life. In 2012, Gina went for a routine MRI to check for signs of arthritis. Over the course of 8 days, she was injected 3 times with a gadolinium-based contrast agent used to enhance the clarity of the scans. After the 3rd injection, her body began to break down. First came a burning sensation that ran down her spine. Then came body-wide pain. Then, she couldn't breathe. She was hospitalized multiple times, but doctors could not find a cause. In a matter of months, a healthy woman became unable to walk on her own. Her memory faded. Her kidneys were damaged. She no longer recognized herself. Chuck took Gina everywhere to find a cure. They tried therapies outside of mainstream medicine because mainstream medicine had no answers. The total cost of her treatment eventually reached nearly $2 million. In 2017, Chuck and Gina filed a lawsuit against 11 pharmaceutical companies seeking $10 million in damages. During an interview with CBS that year, standing in a hospital hallway, he said to the camera, "Nothing's going on here. She's dying. She's dying right in front of me here at this hospital." In 2020, the lawsuit was withdrawn with no settlement. Both sides agreed to cover their own legal costs. Chuck and Gina didn't win, but their story pushed the FDA to strengthen its warnings about gadolinium, and millions of future patients learned of a risk that was rarely discussed before. This was the one fight in Chuck Norris's life he couldn't win with his fists. The enemy had no shape, no face, and no reason. There was only the person he loved, disappearing before his eyes. The last 14 months of his life became a series of 3 devastating losses. In December 2024, his mother Wilma passed away at the age of 103. The first woman who taught him to never give up was gone. In December 2025, his first wife Diane died at 84 after a long battle with dementia. Chuck posted a short tribute online. He wrote that although their lives had taken different paths, her presence in his would never be forgotten. That was December. 3 months later, it was his turn. One question hangs over this final chapter. When Diane was gone, the woman who had been by his side since he was 17 and was the sole witness to his entire journey, did Chuck's heart still have the strength to continue? Or had it finally completed its mission after 86 years of fighting? Hawaii, the final 10 days. In early 2026, Chuck moved to Kauai, a small island in Hawaii. He called it his sanctuary. After 3 consecutive losses, he needed a place without cameras. March 10th was his 86th birthday. He posted the sparring video with the line, "I don't age, I level up." The video received millions of views in its first 24 hours. On March 18th, a family member spoke with him on the phone. He was cheerful. He was still training. He was still making plans for the weeks ahead. On March 19th, he was taken to a hospital in Hawaii for a medical emergency. The family did not release details. He passed away that morning surrounded by his wife and children. According to the family, he went peacefully. On March 20th, the announcement was posted to Instagram. The world fell silent. This time, it wasn't a hoax. 3 times in the past 20 years, in 2020, 2022, and 2025, rumors of his death had spread. And each time he reappeared with a joke. This time, there was no one to deny it. Let's go back to Wieland's prophecy from 1970. Wieland said he wouldn't live to see 27. He died at 26. Chuck died at 86. He had outlived his brother by exactly 60 years, a life more than 3 times as long. Perhaps with every karate championship, every movie, every episode of Walker, Texas Ranger, and every Chuck Norris Facts meme, he was still, deep down, living the life Wieland never got to have. And when he lay down in Hawaii on the morning of March 19, 2026, perhaps he was finally allowed to set that burden down. Chuck Norris's journey began in Ryan, Oklahoma, with a boy who stuttered and wanted to disappear. It ended on a beach in Hawaii, with an 86-year-old man who was still training 9 days before he died. Between those 2 points were 6 decades of fighting. But not all of his fights were on the mat or on the screen. 3 women are rarely mentioned in articles about him, but they were the ones who built the legend of Chuck Norris. His mother, Wilma, taught him to never surrender, and she lived to be 103 to prove it. Diane was the one who forgave him, stood by him through years of poverty, and remained his close friend for 36 years after their marriage ended. Gina was the one he fought to save, not with his fists, but with everything he had left when his fists were no longer enough. The legend of Chuck Norris isn't in his roundhouse kicks. It's not in the memes that say he can divide by 0. The legend is of a man who had every reason to give up and chose not to quietly every time he was knocked down. And perhaps the real question he leaves behind isn't what happened in Hawaii on March 19th. The question is for us. In your own life, what was the moment you chose to level up instead of giving up?